lock in, because the Book of Doors is an open and shut case. Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is your one-stop shop for all things audiobook. The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown was nominated for 2 Goodreads awards in 2024, Best Fantasy Novel and Best Debut. Now, interestingly, I felt like this book had a good number of similarities to The Ministry of Time, which was also nominated for Best Debut Novel. Now, I enjoyed both books, but given my own opportunity to award the books with particular things, I would say Ministry of Time wins for beautiful prose, but I would put the Book of Doors as a winner for pretty much everything else. I think the Book of Doors was significantly more successful in dealing with a very complicated time structure. Both books rely on the reader following a really woven sort of crossroads of time, and I think in the Ministry of Time it just wasn't as strong as the Book of Doors. The Book of Doors did it really well. While I did enjoy the Ministry of Time, there were a number of moments where I felt like I had to go back and double check where I was, and that never happened with the Book of Doors. Everything was essentially super easy to follow, although not uncomplicated. If you've read the Ministry of Time, please know that will not in any way spoil the Book of Doors for you. And likewise, if you read the Book of Doors, it's not going to spoil the Ministry of Time. They do have some things in common, but they're pretty much completely separate books. So both are worthwhile reads, and one's not going to ruin the other. The book follows a young girl named Cassie who's working in a bookstore. One evening, a customer gives her a present, a book, and it turns out that that book happens to be magical. She investigates the book with her best friend and roommate Izzy, who turns out to be quite a character in the story. Now, as the story goes on, tons of characters pop up, and they're all really interesting, and there's a lot to dig into with the secondary characters in the story. Brown does a great job of bringing these characters in whenever they're needed, and quickly clarifying for the reader why they're there and how they can help Cassie or not. I found myself quickly engaged in this story, but I also found that as the book went on, the sort of knot going on in the story had a lot more to untangle than I initially expected. Gareth Brown kind of sneaks in a really complicated plot on you, but he eases you into it, so it doesn't get overwhelming as a reader or listener. I was pleasantly surprised at just how intricate this book was. In fact, the deeper I got into the maze, the more I realized how much maze I had already gone through. But Gareth Brown prepared me for that maze, so it wasn't as though I was confused or in any way just lost as to what was happening. He just sort of didn't really reveal right away that I was walking into a maze, which was kind of cool. I also really enjoyed that the book had a lot of loose ends to tie up. He tied up a lot of them with really neat bows, and then some of them he tied up in ways where I'm not really sure if I was supposed to insinuate something from a little part of the book, or if it was more just a coincidence, or maybe just my imagination. But I enjoyed the balance of things that wrapped up neatly and the balance of things that were left a little bit more ambiguous. I think it was really smartly done. Cassie, our protagonist, really has a wonderful arc throughout the story. She's a little too old for this to be a coming-of-age story, but it's definitely sort of a settling into adulthood story, and I very much enjoyed that aspect of it. Magic in this story can be wielded by anyone, should you possess the right equipment. And it's not inherently good or evil, but rather it's over a spectrum. So the wielder of the magic can use it in any way that they see fit, and that made for a very interesting magic system in this fairly realistic magical realism fantasy book. I appreciated the pacing and development in the story, and the way that Gareth Brown included every single detail for a reason. There were very few things in this book that didn't at some point cycle back and make sense or feel like they are seeds of a later part of the book. It was really very efficiently executed, but also in a way that I didn't suspect a lot of things that were happening as they were initially happening, and then later I went, oh, well, that makes sense. The book was narrated by Miranda Raisin. She does a fantastic job. I was pleasantly surprised to learn that her natural accent is British, and she does the bulk of the narration with a British accent, the way she normally speaks, but she also slips into American accents for the characters for whom that makes sense, really easily. So to be speaking in an American accent when you're doing the dialogue and then have to do the narration in your normal speaking voice, it was just so impressive how seamlessly she transitioned between the two. In fact, it wasn't until I was probably a third of the way through the book that I started to realize, wait a minute, she's routinely switching accents, and I didn't really notice any mispronunciations. I find I'm kind of sensitive to that, and it wasn't in any way blatant enough that I noticed or was bothered. So, nice job, Miranda. I really enjoyed The Book of Doors, and I found it gave me a lot to think about. If you're interested in a magical realism story, sort of an adventure story, something that's a little unusual and maybe something you haven't run into before, it's fantasy, but it's fantasy that feels grounded in reality, which is kind of cool. Sometimes fantasy is set in a world that's brand new and not something we know, but this is really sort of set in a familiar world, just with new rules and new magic that we're not used to seeing in our day-to-day lives. But we do know this universe. So I really liked that about this book, and I found it made me fall into it very quickly. There were a lot of twists and turns in this book, and I know it's one that I will definitely reread. I think it'll be a really fun book to backtrack in and start from the beginning, knowing how it's going to end, and seeing all of the brilliant places that Gareth Brown put some seeds and some sprinkles and some little red herrings. So, given that he's a debut author, he's someone I'll definitely be paying attention to. I really like this one, and I hope you will too. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion. But thanks for listening to mine. I hope you like and subscribe. See you next time.